bros. We're getting ready to get started here. We're getting started to get ready here. It is Monday morning, July the 15th, the Ides of July. And I am your friendly neighborhood Rabbi John Carrier, here to answer your questions, provided that you ask me anything. This is our Monday morning Ask Me Anything session here in the Jew Curious community. And I am here to answer whatever questions you have about Judaism, about the Jewish people, about Jewish traditions. Let me go ahead and show my face. It's only fair. And there I am. I don't know. When I started the live stream a second ago, I think I was still wearing my T-shirt, so that's a little bit embarrassing. But you know, that's the fun of live. So, Kay Dixie, good to see you here, waking up in California, past the coffee and the pretzels. Trigger Sniv says, "Good morning, kids. Good morning to you, Trigger Sniv. Very nice to have you here." And just for giggles and shingles. That's not how that saying goes, but a little bit of station identification. If you have never joined us before, this is the Jew Curious show. This is the Jew Curious morning show here on Twitch TV, and I think we're the only Twitch channel dedicated, 100% dedicated to doing Jewish learning. And it's not just for Jewish people, it's for anybody who considers themselves Jew curious. And that could mean that you're Jewish, been Jewish your whole life, but you're curious about why we do some of the things that we do. Maybe it wasn't all explained to you, or you haven't learned to your satisfaction, or maybe you heard it one way, but realize that there might be more than one way to describe why we do what we do. You could be somebody who's interested in converting to Judaism, and I've talked to a lot of people like that. Fun fact, I am a people like that about 20 years ago myself, so there's no question that you could ask that would upset or offend me. There's no such thing as a dumb question here. Anything that you're curious about with Judaism in your path to becoming Jewish or considering converting to Judaism, that's fair game here today. You might, be a spiritual seeker trying about a bunch of different paths to see which one is right for you, and you've got questions about Judaism, about Jewish traditions and rituals and things like that. You are more than welcome here. You may be completely dedicated to another faith. You know, you may be a Christian person who's curious about the Hebrew roots of your own tradition, and you have some questions. You are also in the right place. If you are Jew curious, you are right where you need to be. And feel free to say hi in the chat. We are simulcasting live to Facebook and also YouTube. I'll say, if you want to ask a question live, I highly recommend that you go to twitch.tv/Jew Curious, because that's the chat stream I am monitoring. While we're building up this channel, I don't have multiple vid screens tracking all the chats and all the places. I will pop into Facebook a little bit later and YouTube just to see what kind of questions are being asked there. But for the most part, we're going to hang out here on Twitch. If you come to join us on Twitch, there's a couple of nice things that you can do. The first thing is you should follow this channel. That way you get a live notification. Excuse me, getting some bubbles in the pipes this morning. Probably should have gargled with olive oil. I don't know what people do before they get on TV. I'm not Al Roker. I envy the man, but I've got a lot to learn to become Al Roker. I'm not really much of a weatherman, as the case may be. But a couple of nice things that you could do is, one, you can follow this channel. There's a little button. If you're watching on Twitch, there's like a little button. Sometimes it's purple. It's got a picture of a heart on it. If you follow this channel, you'll get notified automagically every time we go live. There's other things you can do. You can cheer us on. If you like what we're doing, this is a Twitch affiliate channel. That means Twitch knows we're serious. We've been doing this for a little while now, and there are a couple of ways that you can help us keep doing it. One is to throw us some cheer. There are these things on Twitch called bits. It's like a little Twitch currency. You get some of those, and then we do something cool. You throw some cheer. Cheer us on with some bits. And part of the proceeds of that goes to support this channel. So maybe I can get one of those, multi-screen, multi-chat things going on. I can get some dope video games to stream on Fun Fridays. I'll tell you more about that later. And finally, another thing you could do is subscribe to this channel. Now, you don't have to subscribe to watch this channel. This is free for everybody. However, I understand that Twitch will throw some advertisements in from time to time in order to facilitate this platform, and we're using it for free. So, happy to be on there. But if you prefer an ad-free viewing experience, all you got to do is subscribe to this channel, and you will be able to watch anything that we do ad-free. So let's see who we've got joining us this morning. We've got Chad from We Hope. WHP. Maybe that's West. Oh, that's Chad. That's Chad from West Hollywood. I know you, Chad. We met the other day in a Miller Introduction to Judaism class. We're seeing Trig and Viv and all sorts of cool people here. Drake Clark is here. Says, here is my very broad question for the rabbi. How does the conservative Jewish tradition deal with more ethically difficult passages in the Torah? The taking of slaves as spoils of war, for example. Heavy question, I know. And that is an awesome question. Thank you, Drake, for that. We'll get to that in just a second. Just want to see what else is going on in the chat. Let's see. Twitch Otts says, is Autumn from Arizona? Is it Autumn in Arizona? Or I'm going to go with this is Autumn from Arizona. Thank you for being here, Autumn. Very nice to see you here. I don't know if I've seen you here before. CD Weho says, what's the fine line in terms of practice between traditional conservatism and modern Orthodox? Also, are you familiar with open Orthodox? I'm going to answer. So, Drake Clark asked a much tougher question before, so I'm going to answer. Go for the easy one first, or maybe it's not so easy. Yeah, this is live radio, folks. You need to get your act together. Okay, so let's just take these in order. So I'm going to go with Drake Clark's question first. Here's my very broad question. How does the conservative Jewish tradition deal with the more ethically difficult passages in the Torah? Taking of slaves as spoils of war, for example. Heavy question, I know. And so my answer to that, and conservative Judaism is where I've spent most of my Jewish time. It's the movement that I came in through when I joined a Jewish family and then later converted to the broader Jewish family with conservative rabbis. Been going to almost exclusively conservative synagogues for the last 20 years. And then when I decided to become a rabbi, I went to a conservative seminary. So that's where I feel at home. And my answer to that is the conservative Jewish tradition deals with the more difficult passages in the Torah the same way, I'll say, rabbis and scholars and Jews have dealt with difficult passages in the Torah since the time of the Talmud. And that is with curiosity, maybe a healthy dose of skepticism, and an authentic recognition that people and societies change over time. So my favorite example of this, and so I guess my answer is, conservative Jewish tradition doesn't deal with it in a significantly different way from, let's say, Orthodox or Reform or what have you, in the sense that, we follow the kind of Talmudic way of looking at it of our people has changed over time as prevailing, cultural situations have changed, civilizations have changed, economic realities have changed. Things like, we maintain a sense of connection to Judaism, even though, most of the Torah is written for, seems like the rules are written for like farmers and shepherds and stuff like that. And most Jews I know are neither farmers nor shepherds. Right. Things have changed. We make our living in different ways than we used to. And one of the economic realities used to be slavery. And it's not anymore. And I'm willing to say that vanishingly close to 100% of us are totally okay with that. The fact that, we don't take slaves as spoils of war. We don't have humans in perpetual bondage. What's interesting to me to learn recently is that, we think about slavery in terms of the African slave trade, which was horrific and a crime against humanity perpetuated by several countries, including the United States, for several years. And that most of slavery throughout history, and the slavery for the most part that the Torah was talking about, was not that. It wasn't necessarily about kidnapping people just to enslave them. Slavery was largely a voluntary condition in the time of the Torah, because it was, well, you could debate about voluntary. It was debt slavery. It was the idea that if someone became impoverished and the only way that they could, let's say, buy seed crop for next year was to commit themselves, or more likely a family member, to a kind of indentured servitude or debt bondage of some sort of pre-specified term. In fact, the Torah deals with this itself. It says, okay, slavery is not a good permanent condition for a human being, and it says every few years you got to let your slaves go, right? And everybody, and every 50 years you have the Ovel, like all the property that somebody might have sold to in order to sustain themselves in a tough year goes back to the original property holder. And so even the Torah deals with the institution of slavery in its day by trying to inject some humanity into it. But on a more broad sense, I want to tell sort of a different story by way of example on how Jews have dealt with difficult passages in the Torah, going back at least to the time of the Talmud, and possibly and I think the Mishnah before that. And one of my favorite examples is the story of the Ben Sorer Moreh, the rebellious child. And there's a passage in the Torah that says, when a child rebels against his parents and is a drunkard and a glutton and mouths off to mom and dad, you should take that child to the town square, to the elders of the village, and say, this kid is a rebel. This kid is rebellious against us. He's drinking all our wine. He's eating all our food. He's mouthing off to us. And then the elders of and then the sort of the townsfolk are supposed to stone him to death, including the parents, casting stones. And so the rabbis in the time of the Mishnah, let's say, following sort of traditional timelines, somewhere between like 500 and 1,000 years after the story was written, in the time of the Mishnah, the rabbis and others found this horrific. Like this notion that, even no matter what your child does, like the idea of taking your own child out to the town square to be stoned to death was just so anathema to them as it is to us today, that you get into that discussion, they're like, this is no, like we're not going, like that says in the Torah you should do that, but nobody we know is going to do that. And so they dealt with it in a couple of different ways. First off, in the Mishnah, the rabbis took this case of the rebellious child, and they said, okay, well, we're not going to say that the Torah is bogus. Chas v'shalom, we say that. So nobody tweet me on that. Oh, the rabbi said Torah is bogus. No, this is a rhetorical situation. So what they wanted to do was preserve the integrity of the Torah as a driving document for our people. And they wanted to take this thing that they found disgusting and preserve it in such a way that it preserved the integrity of the Torah, but also didn't push them into killing their own children. And so they decided, okay, all right, Torah, we'll play along. A Ben Sorer Moreh, what is this person? Well, first off, it's a ben. It means it's a son. And so daughters are off the hook for this. Right, so already you've taken the category of people who could be prosecuted for this crime and you cut it in half. Right, and by Ben, we also mean the son, like a child, which means it can't be an adult, but it's also probably somebody who was old enough to do what they were know what they were doing. So we'll say that this applies to only men, and men who are, something like between the ages of 13 and 13 and a half. Right, so it took that category of people who could be prosecuted under this law and made it even smaller. And then it proceeded to add other requirements to it to make it so that this would never happen. And we see this again in Talmudic arguments over various capital cases in the Torah, where Torah's got a lot of things you can get kilt for, put it that way. Not to offend the Scots out there for my reference to kilts, but there's a lot of stuff in the Torah that says if you do this, you shall die. Right, and so by the time that the Sanhedrin, this court, this court was convened to judge cases within the Jewish community, it's clear that they began to make the rules of evidence in capital cases so strict, so punctilious, one of my favorite words if you followed me for a while now, so punctilious that almost nobody ever got killed over things that were in the Torah. They didn't abrogate the death penalty. They didn't say the Torah is bogus. They say, no, we care about the Torah. That's the most important guiding document in our lives. and we are going to exercise our authority to interpret how we apply those laws in such a way that it adheres to our values today. And there was a saying, in the time of the Sanhedrin, that if the court killed more than one person every 70 years, it was considered a bloody court. Right? And so this is how Jews, rabbis, teachers, students, everybody, for well before the conservative movement came into existence, has looked at these difficult passages in the Torah and said, okay, well, that may be what they meant in that time and place, but we don't have the institution of slavery right now, and that's a good thing, right? We may see this system of patriarchy, let's say, that gives all the power to men and none of the authority to women, and say, okay, maybe for its time and place, that reflected the society that they were in. But maybe we can understand today that women are just as capable of taking on the mitzvot as men are, and can have a more egalitarian expression of Judaism without throwing out the Torah. Right? And so you see when the conservative movement makes decisions like that, and it's true that the conservative movement is probably broader in its interpretation than other movements of Judaism, but in doing so, it's not, throwing out the rules. It is following an age-old practice of, holding the Torah in our hands, of taking it seriously, of taking ownership and stewardship of it in a way that allows us to preserve the integrity of the Torah, but also preserve human dignity, because if we didn't, people would look at the Torah and all this, stoning and death penalty and all that business as inapplicable to their lives, and they would just walk away. And I think that's been a part of the Jewish project too, at least as far back as the rabbis of the Talmud and the Mishnah. And so the conservative movement, to answer your question, is sort of carrying on that tradition of interpretation, saying, yes, it's a difficult passage. But just one more point on this, with the story of Ben Sora Moreh, there's a passage in the Talmud that says, this never happened. Right? One of the rabbis looks at this and says, yes, it's egregious to us, but it's not like they wanted to go around killing their kids. It's possible that, God put this in the Torah, not with the intention that it would ever be carried out, but in a way almost to test us. It says, the way the rabbi put it is, to give us merit through studying it, right? So that we could see something that seems disgusting and recognize it as such and figure out a way to honor the Torah without ever actually killing our kids. Right? So, even there, the rabbis in this story said, yes, this is something that we see in the Torah and we react to it, and God wants us to react to it in that way. And it could be that slavery fits into the same category. Slavery as an economic institution predated the gift of the Torah, right? That was how the world was, and people couldn't imagine abolishing it in that day and age. But then the Torah puts on additional restrictions on slavery, like you can't keep people forever against their will, right? You can't, you can't treat your slaves however you like. There has to be some ethics involved. And as such, what the Torah did was take an existing institution and limit it in such a way. And there's another passage that says, when you set your slave free, not if, when you set your slave free, you have to provide them with, a livelihood. You have to provide them with room and board and secure them. And the rabbis looked at this and said, this was God saying, okay, I'm going to make slavery so expensive and so onerous for you that maybe we'll root it out altogether. Same thing happened with the sacrifices. Sacrifices existed before Torah came along, and God said, okay, if we just chuck sacrifices, nobody would follow this religion, because that's what people want to do when they were worshiping God 4,000 years ago, was kill an animal in a place. So God said, okay, you can keep doing that, but you can't all do it, just the priests, and you can't do it anywhere you like, just this one place, so that by the time we lost the temple 1,000 years later, we were over it. We were over sacrifices and began a new mode of worship, which was study and prayer. So this has been kind of a long walk, and it gets into a lot of different areas of theology. But I think it's important to understand that, yes, there are difficult passages in the Torah. As one of my teachers says, if you only study those things that you agree with, you never actually learn anything. But even, excuse me, let's say 1,800 years ago in the time of the Mishnah, they recognized that there were things that we get to disagree with, based on a heightened level of awareness of human dignity, and we get to do something about that. And I don't think the conservative movement is unique in that. They are just, we are just sort of capturing authentically that mode of study that allows us to grow and evolve as a people. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see. There was another great question in there about traditional conservative practice and orthodoxy and open orthodoxy. I don't want to get too deep into I always, me, I'm always answering more than people are asking. I don't want to dive too deep into a history of the modern denominations. I will say that both orthodoxy and conservative expressions of Judaism are roughly 200 years old or less. The Orthodox movement came about as a sort of counter-revolutionary reaction to the Reform movement in the time of Jewish emancipation in the late 18th, early 19th century. The rabbis who would later identify, sort of taking on the label that other people, that the Reform movement gave them as Orthodox, have maintained over the last couple of hundred years that this is authentic Judaism, Torah Sinai. This is exactly the way it's always been done. Sociologist Peter Berger would reject that idea, saying, any kind of movement that has seen modernity can't claim to turn a blind eye and say this is how it's always been done. Orthodoxy came about as a movement of people who witnessed and were present to modernity and then reacted against it, actually encouraging people to be more strict than practices were maybe 100 years before them, just to stake their claim on legitimacy and authority. And so, and I say this with friends who practice. I've got I've got Orthodox friends argument. Sounds terrible already, but no, it's like the idea that so Orthodoxy does try to maintain traditional practices. Conservative Judaism, and throw in the adjective traditional conservative Judaism, there is a bit of a rift within the conservative movement. If it's not exactly an East Coast, West Coast thing or a Canada, America thing, there are conservative places that have not adopted things like egalitarianism, where women count in the minyan and can lead services and are recognized as fully functioning human beings. So I'm more of the egalitarian camp, I'll say. So, if you go into many traditional, what call themselves traditional conservative shoals, you will see the same, let's say, division of gender that you will see in most Orthodox communities. The idea, why I love the conservative movement. I'm not here to sell anything to anybody, and I get no money from these people. I got a good education from these people. I'll say that. I got off track there. That's the fun of live broadcasting. I will say, if you walk into a traditional conservative place or walk into a place that calls itself Orthodox, things will be very similar. The services will be very similar. The division of genders in the room and also in leadership will be very similar. Here's what I wanted to say. Why I love being a part of conservative Jewish communities is that we, by and large, recognize the value of the ritual mitzvot in ways that historically maybe the Reform movement and other expressions of Judaism have not. The Reform movement, took at one point sort of took a look at the different mitzvot and said, okay, these are ethical mitzvot, these are ritual mitzvot, and made this kind of sharp distinction, and didn't throw out the ritual mitzvot by any stretch of the imagination, but just said, all of these things, this is the menu of things that Judaism provides to you, and you should learn about them and then adopt those things which make sense to you, which give your life meaning. And the tagline for a long time, probably still is, was sort of choice through education. Within the Orthodox world, the general consensus, and I can't speak for Orthodoxy, but the general consensus is like, nope, all of these mitzvot are binding on you, and not mixing linen and wool is just as important and just as from the mouth of God as, feed the poor and fight for justice. Right? These aren't divisible into different categories. These are both mitzvot that are binding on everybody. And I appreciate the conservative approach that is, I'll say, a little bit more middle of the road, in the sense that you can approach Jewish space taking a look at all of these things, learning about them, make choices about your own practice without necessarily getting shunned by the community for not adopting the full portfolio of mitzvot outwardly. How I framed it in my, and this is overly simplistic, but how I framed it in my mind several years ago when I decided, yes, for sure, I want to be a part of the conservative movement, other than just sort of passively accepting it because that's where my family was. How I kind of framed it in my mind was, if you are in a Reformed community, there might be some people there who are putting on tefillin or will teach you to put on tefillin, but there's not a lot of spaces where people get together regularly and put on tefillin. Right? These are particular paraphernalia of prayer, or paraphernalia as I call them, but there's not a lot of opportunities to observe sort of those ritual mitzvot, such as tefillin. If you go into an Orthodox community, there's lots of places, you might have a daily menu, and you might have this expectation that you show up and put on tefillin, and if you don't, that's considered, sort of deficient on your part. And what I like about being involved in conservative synagogues that I've been in, you can go in and you can find a place to put on tefillin. They'll have a service for you where you can put these on. They'll have people who will teach you how to do this. It's considered, normative behavior. And yet, if it's not your bag, or if that's not a mitzvah that you've worked your way up to yet, nobody's going to judge you or shun you from the community for not taking on that mitzvah. Right? So there's an opportunity for teaching and learning and practicing there without, let's say, the ultimate expectation of adhering to all the mitzvot that everybody else is adhering to. And so, yes, that is a gross generalization of the different denominations, and there are diversity of opinion and practices within the denominations. Like I'll say, if you're going into what calls itself a traditional conservative place, but that's the other piece I like about the conservative movement. All of the mitzvot, like in Orthodoxy, are considered binding, meaning God said, do this, don't do that, and meant it. And we make room for people to take those on without necessarily, pushing the same kind of communal consequences for people who aren't there yet. So that's my take. There are going to be people who disagree with me about all of those things. So let's see. Drake Clark is sharing a great question from Drake, and also from Chad and WeHo. Thanks for those. Drake is sharing a joke with us. I heard a good joke you guys may enjoy. We'll be the judge of that. One Shabbos, Benjamin woke up and was in a terrible mood. I don't want to go to shul. I don't want to go. His mother said, now, Benjamin, cut that out. First off, you're 45. Second, you're the rabbi. I've heard that one before. It never gets old. It might be a little old, but so it's a classic, I'll say. Jersey Girl, Indiana Jones question. What does history say about what became of the Ark of the Covenant? So I think the basis of Indiana Jones is that, we don't know what happened to the Ark of the Covenant. The temple was destroyed by the Romans the second temple was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 of the Common Era. And by destroyed, I mean destroyed, like not just the building, but all the accoutrement thereof, the ark, the menorah, the altar, all the things that we used to have, in the temple, schmeist, right? Sort of lost to history. Now, Indiana Jones is kind of a fictional story based on a speculation that it might have been preserved somewhere, and somebody unearths it and it has the power to melt Nazi faces. Would that were true. I've never seen it personally. I've seen many artistic renderings and reconstructions thereof, because it gives some specific instructions in the Torah and in the oral tradition on what it was made of and what it was shaped like, and people have made artistic renderings of it. So we have a good idea of what it looked like, and yet we don't know about its disposition any more than we know about the disposition of the menorah, like the big 7-lighted lampstand that was there. And so it's sort of lost to the sands of history, as far as we know. When Romans destroy stuff, they were terribly efficient about it. And so, to this day, what we have of the temple is I'll say, minor retaining wall, right? If you go to the Kotel in Jerusalem, people look at this as having a connection to the temple, but the temple itself is completely erased. It was up on the mount, where there's like a mosque with a gold dome up there now, and it's kind of tricky getting up there if you're Jewish for contemporary political reasons. But down below that, there is a wall, and this is called variously the Western Wall, because it's on the west side of the Temple Mound. What it was a retaining wall for the mound itself, not an actual wall of the temple, but it's the closest we have to architecture that was there at the time of the temple, sometimes called the Western Wall or the Wailing Wall, God forbid, the Wailing Wall, or simply in Hebrew is the Kotel, which just means wall. And so that's the site that people go to today to pray. Just because it's got this connection to a time that was really holy in our let's say self-sovereignty, sort of the second commonwealth of the Jewish people in our promised land, and this is an artifact thereof. And so getting close to that allows us to get a little bit closer by proxy to that holy time. And you can see pictures of it. There's a big plaza, because again of political considerations in Israel today, where fundamentalist versions of Judaism dominate sort of the religious rulemaking in the country. It's now divided between men's section and women's sections, the way it hasn't been historically until into the 20th century. There are certain sections you can go to that people can participate in an egalitarian way, but they're sort of shunted off to the side. I actually went to, when I was there studying, we found another portion of the wall that was sort of down, it was kind of up the stairs in a way and down a dark alleyway. You can find other sort of, let's say, more private sections of the wall, which were part of the same wall, but have since been built over and things like that, and kind of show up in alleyways and things between now and then. So I hope that helps with the Indiana Jones question. There's been lots of speculative fiction over the years about different things connected to that holy time. It makes for fun stories, especially if you like to see bad things happen to Nazis. But according to Indiana Jones, the Ark is in a warehouse somewhere of magical objects, let's say. Trigger Sniff says, does the color of a kippah represent anything? Boy, howdy, as my Texas rabbi friend John Hodson would say. It can. Often you will see, so let's say I'll just take this off for a second, but I won't walk 4 cubits, so I'll be okay. I'd say you shouldn't, go more than 4 cubits without wearing a kippah in more recent, let's say, law codes. So mine is black. I wear a black kippah because it goes with everything. That's as significant as it is. It sort of matches, my dark hair, or back when my hair used to be dark, and all there. But I like to wear a black kippah just because it's the most simple thing. For the same reason I wear white shirts every day. I like to cut, in my life I find I have enough decisions to make without picking out my shirt color for the day or picking out my kippah color. So I always wear a black one, just my thing. One of those, uniform people, or maybe like a cartoon character like Peter Griffin always has a white shirt and green pants. So I wear a white shirt and either jeans or khakis, depending on where I am. And I always wear a black kippah. And it really doesn't mean more to me than, a kippah that I can always put on without having to dwell or think about whether it matches my necktie or something. No offense, Rabbi Artson, who often will have a kippah that matches his necktie for purely personal reasons. However, if you are traveling in Israel and some parts of America as well, you can often tell about someone's religious affiliation based on religious or political affiliation, let's say, based on the kippah that they wear. And of course, if you go to Jerusalem or Israel in general, but Jerusalem especially, where you've got a great diversity of Jews, the kippah itself, there are fashion trends, or there are, let's say, trends in how people wear their kippah that have tribal markers to them. And by tribal, I don't mean just like the Jewish tribe, but sort of lower T tribal in kind of the Seth Godin sense, where you can identify yourself as part of a group and other people in that group can identify you by wearing a certain kind of kippah, in the vein of like, people like us do things like this, and we can identify each other out in the world. And so in Israel, the kind of kippah that you wear, and that could be the color, that could be its construction. Knit, I will always wear a knit one just because that's more dati leomi, which is another affiliation altogether. But let's say a black velvet kippah signifies adherence to, let's say, a certain Hasidic dynasty. Like if you see somebody in America wearing a black velvet kippah around, not just the one that they put on when they go to the synagogue, but if they're wearing it around, that's probably an affiliation to a Hasidic sect here in America, and similarly in Israel. Like people who wear black kippot tend to be more religiously punctilious, doing more mitzvot in an outward way. Whereas if it's more colorful, that might be more. But if it's like a knit kippah and it's more colorful or has a pattern on it, that's considered sort of, as they say, dati leomi, like religious nationalists, in the sense of yes, we're religious. Yes, we identify with other Israelis more than we identify with a particular Hasidic sect. And so you might see a colorful knit kippah, and that means one thing, or you might see a black velvet kippah or a brown velvet kippah, which usually means a black velvet kippah that's faded from use. And you can identify people's, like if you're hip to Israeli trends in the fashion of head coverings, you can often walk around and identify what synagogue somebody goes to, how they might vote in the next election, or, if they're not wearing a kippah, that's another statement altogether. So in places where lots of people wear kippot, just like in places where people wear lots of shoes, you can tell somebody's station in life, or political affiliation, or socioeconomic affiliation, or level of education by the clothes that they wear. Likewise in Israel, by the kippah that people wear. And I say Israel, but also in large Jewish communities in America, like in New York or LA as well. So for me, a black kippah means I don't have to like rifle through my drawer finding a kippah that matches my clothes. That's about as far as it goes. And I like the knit one just because kind of adheres. It's not too outward. For me, I'll say an important principle is not being, let's say, immodest with my piety. And this is a personal decision I made years ago. I wear, if you've been around rabbis from Chabad, or been in religious Jewish neighborhoods, you might see people have those kind of strings hanging out of their pants. Those are tzitzit. Those are the fringes that were commanded in the Book of Numbers, in the Torah, to say you should have these fringes on your garment and be reminded of the mitzvot. And in many communities, you'll see people have these sort of hanging out of their clothes so that not only they can see them, but everybody else can see them as well. And I've been wearing these it means basically there's like a tallit under my shirt right now. I'm not going to take it out because that would be kind of again immodest. But most of the time when I'm teaching or walking around, I have a tallit on under my shirt, and I have these fringes. But if you saw me in the street, you wouldn't see them hanging out because I tuck them in. This was based on some study I did with a rabbi of mine years ago. And this gets in. I've had a debate with another rabbi about this. It is an interpretation of the Chofetz Chaim, or a commentary on the Chofetz Chaim, on the Shulchan Aruch, kind of inside baseball, that one may, it's good to wear a tallit that has fringes on it. If you live in a place where this is uncommon, like I live in Burbank, California, then it's acceptable to have these kind of tucked into your clothes if you think, harm might come to you, or if you prefer to be modest about your religious undertaking. And that's my approach, is that I respect people who wear the Tallit Katan. I respect people who have the fringes hanging out where they can see them and other people can see them as well, because again, that becomes kind of a tribal marker, like, oh, I see you wear those things, I wear those things too, so I trust you and we can hang. Or I've also seen people wear them in the same vein, but also with a hint of protest. Like when women wear them in religious communities where women don't wear that sort of thing, they're making a statement that I am a woman who has taken on these mitzvot, or who feels obligated to these just as men do, and whether people like that or not, this is who I am. That's another kind of signaling. So for me, I wear them for personal religious reasons, that I am, reminded of the mitzvot. Believe me, I know they're there. But I don't have the need for other people to know that about me. Like, this is like, I know what I'm doing. I know how I'm adhering to the mitzvot. And I'm more concerned that by wearing them, I'm going to separate myself and put up a barrier between me and someone who's, let's say, less comfortable with those and are learning together, right? So I've worked in a couple of conservative synagogues now, and if I walked around with my tzitzit hanging out, there might be somebody who is Jew curious who wants to learn about Judaism, but if they saw me wearing the fringes hanging out of my pants, they'd be like, I don't know if that's the guy to learn from, because that reminds me of a Chabad rabbi, and I don't want to learn with Chabad rabbi. And so, we all make choices on how we dress and the kind of signals that we send. I send the signal that, when I walk around with a kippah, I said, hey, I'm a rabbi, ask me anything. I'm part of this community, and I'm a teacher in this community. So feel free to connect with me on that basis. But in other ways that I observe the mitzvot, I do it privately, explicitly not trying to call attention to it, because I'm concerned that might separate me from people that I could actually help. And so that's a personal thing. Sorry, I didn't mean to be a rabbi overshare this morning on my particular religious undergarments, but it's a decision that I've made, and it's something that people have asked me about before, so I just did it there. All right. Let's see. General question for everyone. Drake Clark asks, we are attending our first bat mitzvah ceremony this Friday evening at a Reform shul. My daughter wishes to bring a small Star of David necklace as a gift. Is this acceptable? Would another gift be more appropriate? As bat mitzvah gifts go, a Star of David necklace is pretty common, right? And so I say that is like, that's a common bat mitzvah gift, so I don't see why that would be unacceptable. And so yes, go right ahead with your bad self and bring the Star of David necklace. I think it's a nice gift, and if she knows that person wears necklaces and would appreciate that thing, I think that's a really thoughtful gift. Nawa 64, we're talking about hats and head coverings and things like that. Check out Rapunzel, she says. So I usually wear hats, but I've recently gotten back to head wrapping. So this is another way in which people express their Jewish spirituality by covering their head or covering their hair for different reasons, and head wrapping is a thing that people do. So Rapunzel with a W looks like has a good resource on this. Let's see. Jersey Girl, in our experience, cash was the preferred gift. In our case, children use the cash for charity and future planning. I'll just say personally, I'm like, I discourage people from bringing cash to a temple on a Friday night. But again, that's my own religious expression. If you want to get a kid cash and they save up and they, spend it on charity, or they save up for college, that's nice too. I wouldn't bring it to the synagogue, because so people feel differently about handling money in synagogues on a Friday, so maybe put it in a cart and send it to them ahead of time, or something like that. So, but I think a necklace is a nice gift too. See, Chad from WeHo, CB WeHo 2019, with a conservative conversion, which Tallit do you choose at the Judaica store? At the store, they said the choice was based on where you go. This is another thing where you'll see different fashions in different places. I personally prefer the big shawl, like the big almost square thing that wraps around your shoulders. It gets very hot in the summertime, I'll say that. Especially if I'm leading service and I'm wearing like a wool suit that day. And nothing makes you hotter in a wool suit and tie than a big wool shawl over that. So hopefully the air conditioner is working that day. But yes, I would say, think about the synagogue that you want to spend a considerable amount of time in. God willing, you find a synagogue you want to spend a considerable amount of time in. And I would kind of go along with what the other people there are wearing. And again, this is just a snapshot of Jewish culture in like late 20th, early 21st century. In conservative places, you might see more the big shawl. In Reform places, you may more often, not exclusively, but more often see like the sort of small stole, less ostentatious. But you'll find a big shawl in Reform places, and you'll find the stole in conservative places. Back I think in the 50s and 60s especially, people were much more modest and went with the smaller style. Nowadays, we kind of do everything to 11. Thank you, Gen X. We have the big thing. So I would just say, go to the synagogue where you feel comfortable. Keep an eye open for what different people do, different people that you like, different people that you respect. Ask them, like, why did you choose the shawl that the tallit that you did? And then you will sort of develop your own taste for it. The thing is, it just needs to be a rectangular garment, a garment with four corners of certain minimal dimension, which the Judaica store will have. And the Judaica store is not going to sell you hopefully the Judaica store is not going to sell you a tallit that's not a tallit. It'll meet the basic minimum requirements, and beyond that, you just sort of get to choose what feels right for you. I like the bigger one because I like to feel fully kind of wrapped and embraced in it, and that's a matter of personal taste. So let's see. Trig says, can you tack it to your body so it doesn't fall off your shoulders? I see people struggle to keep it on a lot of times. So yes, this is a thing too, especially if you got the big shawl one on. If you're watching if you're going to a synagogue or watching live streams of a synagogue, and the rabbi up front or the cantors are like constantly futzing with it, just like I've heard there's a couple of different things you could do. There's like a little kind of chain that people put that kind of connects it together so it doesn't fall off. It's almost like a little tie chain that connects two sides together. I've seen a way of putting it on and folding it and tucking the shoulders underneath and then over the top. There's probably YouTube diagrams on this that makes it slip around less. I don't worry about that too much. I just tend to, futz with it more. But maybe I need something to fidget with in the synagogue, and that's a personal problem. So yes, I don't know about tacking it so much to your body, but there is a way of folding it so that it doesn't move around so much. But that's a black belt move. So if you can figure out how to do that, go right ahead. Let's see. CB WeHo 2019 says, I wasn't sure about the color, like with blue or black stripes. The color, I'll say, halakhically, doesn't matter as much. It's more of a fashion thing. Often it's made out of white because, the main color is white because that symbolizes a kind of purity. Sometimes it has stripes on it. The stripes, my understanding, are sort of reflective of Joseph's coat. In the Torah, it didn't say that Jacob gave his son Joseph a Technicolor dream coat. That was purely a Broadway invention. If you look at it, it doesn't even say a coat of many colors necessarily in the Dolly Parton song. What it says is he gave his son a striped cloak, cloak with pasim, like stripes. And so, but that was considered a nice thing. It's like not just a plain cloak, a cloak with stripes. And some people interpreted that, having stripes meant it had stripes of multiple colors and it was colorful, and hence we get this image of the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But at its very basis, just having stripes was pretty fancy back in the day. So sometimes they have blue stripes, sometimes they have black stripes. So like mine is like white with black stripes. Again, that's just my minimalist mid-century style coming out. Sometimes it's white with multicolored stripes that mean different things to different people. Sometimes it's a dark color with light stripe. I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it matters if it's something that you're comfortable in. Like, just wear something you feel comfortable wearing on a regular basis that makes you feel elevated when you wear it. Other than that, the design's not such a big deal. I mean, it should be made out of, wool or acrylic or something. We don't make them out of leather, for example. You shouldn't have a leather tallit. But other than that, I don't think the Judaica store is going to steer you wrong. What I like about just sort of opening it up and saying wear what you like is because it should be something that you feel like you own, right? It's the difference between wearing a kippah that feels yours versus picking up a shiny satin one out of the bin that was left over from a bar mitzvah, right? Because that's just something you're adopting for the moment and then discarding, versus getting a kippah that you like. Mine's the kind of well-worn. It's not as dark black as it used to be, but it's mine. And when I went to the Beit Din, below these 19 years ago, one of the questions they asked was like, "Tell me about your kippah." And the reason they asked me that they told me later is like sometimes people and my kippah was like a kippah sruga. It was knit, and it had kind of a snowflake pattern on it. But they were impressed that I had one that was mine. It wasn't just one that I picked up out of the bin that day and put it on for the occasion and would leave it behind. It's something that I wore on a somewhat regular basis that I felt ownership of. And they saw in that I felt some ownership of my Jewishness as well. And so when you pick out a tallit, pick out something, again, the store is probably not going to sell you something that's not kosher. Within that range of acceptability, pick out something that you feel expresses you, something that you feel comfortable in, because God willing, it's going to be something you use throughout your life, and may even be an heirloom someday. You never know. And so pick out something that expresses you, expresses who you are, that you don't mind putting on every week or even every day, depending on your prayer practice and where you are. So pick out something that expresses you, whether it's your kippah or whether it's your tallit, whether you want to express solidarity with the community that you belong to, and so I'm going to get a kippah and tallit that look like what other people have, or maybe you want to express your unique personality, so you get something that is unique to you, and that's how you embrace the mitzvot that you have in common with the people in your community. So there's a lot of ranges for creativity here, and so again, I think the purpose of halacha, and I've been on this hobby horse before, isn't to limit our choices or erase our identity. It's to give us a guide so that we can be in step with other people in the community and have, a sense of solidarity and a sense of common purpose, but then still be able to express our individual gifts within that context of connection to others. And so that's when you're picking out. I never know where we're going to go on Ask Me Anything Monday, but I've really appreciated this conversation about just the realia of Jewish life, or as I call it, paraphernalia. That's my I coined that word myself. Prayer, like the paraphernalia of prayer. It's your kippah or your tallit or your tefillin. I always say, hey, where's my paraphernalia? Okay, I'm gonna stop dad joking that one. Trigger Sniff says, okay, kids, duty calls. Really glad to have you here, Trig. Jersey Girl says, same question as Drake Clark. In the vision of the new temple, how do we see animals? Oh, I must have missed that one. This chat moves pretty fast here. In the vision of the new temple, how do we see animal sacrifice in that? Will we follow the tradition? So, can I predict the future? I cannot. Is it in our prayer book that we mourn the loss of the second temple? Yes, it is. In some of our prayer books. Do we pray for the restoration of the third Jewish Commonwealth, in which Mashiach brings us all bodily, even the dead ones among us, back to Jerusalem to worship at a third construction of the same kind of temple where we resume animal sacrifices? For many Jews, that is an article of faith. And I'll say for many Jews, probably about as many, the idea that we have transcended the need for animal sacrifices is an article of faith as well. So, and I say this to say there's diverse opinions within the Jewish community. It was sort of an article of sort of the platform of the Reform movement in the 19th century that, why many synagogues are called temples. This began, but isn't exclusive to, but began in the Reform movement, saying we're going to call our synagogues temples because this is our temple today. Made the decision as a denomination, we're not praying for the restoration of the third temple. That was a thing that God wanted for us back then. We proved for 2,000 years that we can be Jewish without it. And now the focus of our prayer has moved from temples and sacrifices to study and prayer and acts of justice and kindness in the world. Not that, the temple time didn't require justice or kindness. Isaiah was pretty explicit about that, as that we were doing too much temple stuff and not enough justice and kindness stuff. But the idea with Rabbinic Judaism is that we can be Jewish without having a temple. And for some people, they say, yeah, but we really would rather have the temple back. And I'm not going to sugarcoat this. There are people who are actively working toward that, in the sense of they've got all the architectural plans drawn up, they keep their knives sharp, they practice the customs of sacrifice because they fully believe and pray for that temple service being restored exactly the way it was 2,000 years ago before the Romans destroyed the temple. And that is their vision of a Jewish future. There are other Jews for whom the vision of the future is, yes, we sacrificed animals when that's how people did religion. God taught us a way to limit that. God taught us another way to express our Jewishness without that. And boy, if we didn't learn our lesson with 2 temples being destroyed, when are we going to learn that lesson? And even Maimonides, about 1,000 years ago, said, our way of doing Rabbinic Judaism is an evolutionary step up from temple times. And in the future, there may even be another step up for how we practice Judaism that doesn't involve the kind of prayer services and study that we do today. That's just a particular take. And so in the vision of, just to go back to the question, in the vision of the new temple, how do we see animal sacrifices in that? Will we follow tradition? There are Jews who say, yes, absolutely, and let's keep our knives sharp. And then there are Jews who say, that's not essential to my Jewish identity or being connected to it. I will say I'm of the latter camp, of saying our being Jewish and maintaining a covenant with God doesn't require killing animals in a singular building. That's my take. And there are rabbis who will disagree with me, and there are rabbis who will agree with me. But I wanted to teach all the different perspectives here, because that's, I think, the most fair and authentic to the Jewish project thing to do is to teach multiple opinions on the same thing. If anybody tells you that there's only one right way to be Jewish, I'm going to disagree with that. And as one of my Orthodox teachers says, there's about as many different ways of doing Jewish as there are Jewish people doing it. So that's my message for you today. I did say I was going to have a question of the day. Because I've had multiple questions from you. I got to play 2. I'm going to ask a question. And feel free to chime in. Just real quick, station identification. This is the Jew Curious School show. Jew Curious School is another thing. We can talk about that another time. This is the Jew Curious show. Anybody who is curious about Judaism is welcome here to ask whatever questions you like. And you are accepted and welcomed here if you want to chat. If you don't want to chat, if you just want to lurk, that's cool too. There are ways that you can support this channel if that's the kind of thing that you are into. First off, give us a follow just so you know when we're live again and you can participate in these discussions. If you like what we're doing, throw some cheer. There's some on Twitch you can buy bits and throw cheer, and it's whole Twitch jargon thing, but it's ways to just sort of give little flash donations to help keep these broadcasts going, to help me maintain equipment and software and that kind of stuff that I need for this. And if you would like an ad-free way of viewing these things, you can subscribe to this channel, and I think that starts at like the $5 a month level. Just look at the little buttons around your screen on twitch.tv/JewCurious. That's a way that you can help us keep this project going. You are welcome here whether you contribute or not. I want to be very super duper clear about that, and say that I'm grateful for everybody who contributes, whether through their voice or through their contributions. That just helps us keep doing this together somewhat indefinitely. So really appreciate everybody's ideas today. Oh, that's right. I was going to ask you a question today. My question for you is, and this this is a question whether you were born Jewish or whether you came to this kind of later in life. What was your first Jewish memory? That's my question for you today. What was your first Jewish memory? Like, when did you first encounter Judaism in a way that you remember? And I would love to hear what people's answers are. And while you're thinking about it, I'll tell you mine. I was not born to this. This is something that I came to later in life, like fully in adulthood, if you can call 25 being an adult. But my first time I remember meeting Jewish people and understanding kind of what that meant, I was about, 10 years old. We just moved from Texas to, of all places, West Virginia. My father was an academic. He's still with us, thank God. Retired about 20 years now, but he was a college professor. And so that's, sometimes people hear how much I've moved in my lifetime, and they say, oh, you're in the Army, or your parents were in the Army. It's like, nope, I'm an academic brat. And I've moved around because academic jobs are hard to get, and it's a nationwide thing. And enough about me. We moved from Texas to West Virginia. Not just West Virginia, but like the southernmost county of West Virginia, like just over the border in Mercer County, to a small town, Athens, Texas, 1,236 souls. And that's where we met. That's where I met the first Jewish people that I ever remember meeting. I heard that there was a Jewish family back in my town in Texas, but I never remember meeting them. But the Bells were the first Jewish people that I remember meeting. Sid and Edith Bell. Aloha Shalom. The Bell family was, I believe, the only Jewish couple in town, and they didn't have any kids in the house. They had, I think, 3 kids who had grown up in that town as like the only Jewish kids in town, and then had gone off to college. But these are sort of older folks with grown kids, and they were neighbors of ours, just like 3 or 4 doors down. And Sid Bell was a history professor, and my dad was a history professor, and so they were, fast friends. And he had grown up, I think, in New York, before World War II. His family was already over here. He'd grown up in New York. His wife, Edith, was a Shoah survivor. Grew up, I want to say in Germany. I think her family was in Germany, not in Poland. But she had been to Auschwitz and was in Auschwitz when it was liberated and escaped because the liberation wasn't necessarily a safe place to be when like the Russian troops were coming in. Many people had as much hard luck with the Russian troops liberating the camps as they did with the Nazis running the camps in some circumstances. But this was the first Jewish couple I ever knew, my first exposure to Jewish people. And then they had a diverse Jewish story. He'd grown up in the United States. She had grown up in Germany and survived the Holocaust, and they met in Panama, I think. Like he was in the Army and was in Panama. Her family had gone to Panama. They met in Panama, and they raised a Jewish family in, like one of the southernmost towns in West Virginia. And that's my first Jewish like where I learned about who Jewish people were and what they were all about, was in a very, let's say, un-Jewish place. Like not a lot of Jews around there. Like the closest synagogue was probably an hour and a half away. And I kid you not, they made their own bagels. Like, we think bagels have been around for a while. Bagels weren't that popular in West Virginia back in the mid-'80s. Like, the closest bagel was probably an hour away in the state capital or something. But they made their own. They would bake bagels at home. And it's like, that's hard. Like, it's like baking Wonder Bread. You can't do it. But they would make their own stuff, and they expressed their Judaism by leading the local Rainbow Coalition, by working at the Natural Food Co-op, and they had a bunch of like anti-war posters in their house and labor organizing posters in their house. And that's where I got to know about Judaism first, was through Sid and Edith Bell, of blessed memory. So that's it. KJ, that's my first Jewish memory. Getting some great answers in here. Nawa64, Pesach with my now husband's family. I'll say that was maybe one of my second Jewish memories, was when I started dating a Jewish girl in college, who would be my first wife, was going to Passover at her family's house. So that's a very common point of entry for many people. So I love hearing about that. Jersey Girl says, a friend's bat mitzvah. Also, many people's like first encounter with Judaism is just going to a friend's coming of age celebration. KG Wilcox from Philadelphia says, watching my next door neighbor light Shabbat candles before heading off to temple. I was there to babysit the kids. That's really nice. Kay Dixie says, first memory was in high school and went to drop off a homework handout at another student's house and saw a mezuzah on the doorpost, right? You don't see that in a lot of houses. If you're walking into a house and there's a mezuzah on the doorpost, they're probably Jewish. And you don't see those in a lot of houses that aren't Jewish. There are, many Christians these days that are adopting mitzvot and Jewish practices, so it's not a 100% thing that it's going to be a Jewish house, but that's a thing that I didn't know what it was until I was, firmly connected to a Jewish family. Drake Clark says, driving past a tiny, tiny independent shul in my hometown of Florence, Alabama, and I always wondered if more than 10 or so people could fit in there. It was really small, I guess. It's still there. A rabbi from Nashville travels down once a month to lead services. Yep, and the South is home to many circuit riding rabbis. It sort of reminds me of circuit preachers back in the day. Like, doesn't remind me. I wasn't there, but I remember growing up hearing about circuit preachers, like preachers who would go to small town churches that couldn't support having a full-time preacher, but the preacher would go from church to church, and once a month or something. And they have rabbis for that as well, especially in the South to this day. So listen, everybody, really appreciate you being here today. Really appreciate everybody sharing their heart, sharing their questions, sharing their kindness with one another in the chat. Just a quick plug, station identification. This is the Jew Curious Show. If you are curious about Judaism, the Jewish people, Jewish traditions, you are more than welcome here to ask questions anytime you like. We regularly meet now on Mondays and Fridays. Mondays is just kind of Ask Me Anything like we've been doing. I never know what's going to be asked, but it always turns out great, and today was no exception. We will be back on Friday morning, 9 a.m. for Fun Friday. We had a little bit of a schedule hiccup last week because I had to go to the airport, but we still had it late in the afternoon. This Friday, we'll be getting together at 9 a.m. on Friday morning for Fun Friday, which means we do pretty much the same thing, except very different. You can ask me whatever questions you like, and I have to answer them while playing video games over live stream. It sort of gets back to our Twitch roots, and also lets us have a little fun doing something that not every rabbi teaches this way, but I have fun doing it. So make sure to join us for Fun Friday, 9 a.m. Pacific, noon Eastern, this coming Friday. Next week, have to say, I'm going to be on vacation. So I almost a year ago ended my tenure at a wonderful temple in Burbank and decided that I would spend the year doing mostly digital teaching. And it's almost my anniversary of doing that, when we'll maybe talk about that another time, maybe bring it up on Fun Friday. But after a year of teaching pretty faithfully digitally every week, sometimes every day, I'm going to take a week off and take my own little week-long sabbatical, going back to the home country of Texas. So we will not have a live stream next week. The Jew Curious School will be on a week-long summer break. So next week, if you don't see me around next week, it's nothing personal. It's nothing you said or I did. I'm just taking a vacation. But make sure you tune in for Fun Friday. And also, I'll say, just for the people who might be interested, we do have another way to connect, and that's called the Jew Curious School. This is a private online school of Jewish learning where we have a lot of, I'll say, beginner and not so beginner courses as well. We have some beginner level stuff like an introduction to Judaism class that's about 26 lessons. We're on lesson 25 today, but you can go back and watch the whole thing in recording. There's another one that I have to kind of fix and re-upload, but in any case, there's about 6 months of Jewish learning already in the can there. There's some more intermediate classes. We're doing a class today on Jewish thought, specifically on kind of a historical overview of Kabbalah, if you're interested in that sort of thing. And another thing that we do is we get together and have a live lesson over video within the school on the Torah portion of the week. And this week, I know I say this about a lot of Torah portions, but this is one of my favorites. It is Parashat Balak, in which we have the story of a talking donkey. So if you don't want to miss that, I'll go ahead and throw a link up in the chat to the Jew Curious School. Check it out. See if it's right for you. If it's not, that's cool. We we'll get together live twice a week anyway. But see if it might be right for you. It's especially designed for people who may live in a place where they don't have access to a synagogue or a rabbi that they can connect with. I put it out there for you. We got about 4 dozen people in the community so far. It's a really nice community. And if you just want to try it out and see if it's right for you, you can try it out 30 days risk-free. And if you try it out for a couple of weeks, decide this isn't for me, full refunded tuition, no questions asked. So I'll just put a link in here right now so you can check that out if you want to. I'm going to type on my daughter's computer, which is always harder than my own. That's good radio. School/info. So go to jewcurious.school/info for more information about the Jew Curious School. Try it out, see if it's right for you. So I want to thank everybody for throwing cheer, throwing some bits in, for subscribing, for following us, or just showing up and bringing yourself. Always, always, always love learning with you, Hero, and grateful to have that opportunity today. Thanks for asking some great questions. Thanks for giving some great answers to my question of the day, and love to see you around. Until next time, heroes, peace.